This video is sponsored by Aura. Hey, listen, let me ask y'all something. Have y'all ever thought to Google your ex's name and then you found it featured on a mature website on a video with an upload date before y'all broke up? Yeah, I haven't done I haven't done that either, dog. I don't even know why I brought that up. Anyway, if you are anything like me, your next thought was probably to Google your own name to make sure that you wasn't featured in the recommended tab of that video. And even if you didn't, then you probably found some much more incriminating stuff, like your phone number, your home address, and maybe even your social. Well, that's where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in. Y'all should know the drill by now. Aura alerts you when your data has been a part of a breach. It also will make requests to those data brokerage websites to have your information deleted from off of them, so you don't gotta worry about no more spam calls from call centers out in Mumbai somewhere. It also gives you things like a VPN, password manager, transaction monitoring, and lets you know when folk try to access your accounts unauthorized. So go to my link on the screen below, aura.com/Lil Bill, or just click the link in the description for a free 14-day trial and tell me that you don't feel just a little bit more secure in these perilous times of ours. Again, that's aura.com/Lil Bill, and protect your neck today.
I've often said that despite me growing up in what is, according to Business Insider at least, the 17th most miserable city in America and the worst state capital in the country, literally the only one without its own movie theater, a place that at one point was so desperate for revenue that the mayor made a deal with the state to build a big ass highway between downtown and the waterfront that set a precedent that resulted in what was once the business district of that city just becoming a bunch of government buildings, parking lots, and storefront churches, all of which you can't tax, by the way, so there goes that revenue. I did not realize that I was poor until I went to college, and all of my friends were busy planning their first coke orgies in Aspen, while I was busy in the financial aid office practically begging on bended knee for a way to work off the balance of the bill that my scholarship didn't cover. I'm begging. Yes, I am not proud of some of my past deeds. I'll just keep it at that. One of the hidden benefits of having parents who hate each other is 2 Christmases. And one of the benefits of having an overbearing grandmother is that her Christmas is like having 2 with both of your single parents. So that's like, what, 8 Christmases or something. See, this is why I was a humanities major. My point being, every hood has that one kid who lives like a king until he has to go outside and see the neighborhood crackhead stealing the radio and ashtray full of loose change from out of his mom's Oldsmobile. Or that same mother having to use her rent check to get the car fixed. So now you're stuck spending the month watching Major Payne and Sleeping Beauty on VHS until the cable gets turned back on. And also the hot water. I was that kid, is what I'm saying. The one with a PlayStation at one house and an N64 at the other. The one who always had a fresh pair of black Air Forces when the school year started and butters for when the clock struck October. I was the kid who had no friends and 2 Game Boys because no one else on my block had one. So this was literally the only way that I could evolve my goddamn Kadabra into an Alakazam. Point being, I was the definition of what you would call hood rich growing up, which for the cul-de-sackers in the audience, it just meant that my dad made decent enough money and my grandparents had a big enough pension that I could actually get what I wanted for my birthday and Christmas like 99.9% of the time. That 0.1% is the one year that I wish for my mom and my dad to get married. But like I say, man, kids are freaking dumb.
That's rough, buddy.
What was I thinking? But he didn't make enough money to move anywhere beyond the city limits without being house poor. So I just wound up going to Catholic school for most of my life. But even if he did make enough money, my mom had primary custody anyway. So yeah, y'all are already kind of seeing my point, hopefully, without me dredging up any more childhood trauma. Anyway, the point is, relative to most of my friends and family, my childhood was pretty privileged, which is why when I saw my my friends and family turned to the streets to sustain themselves.
Come here, come here, come here, come here, come here, come here. Drugs.
Hi there.
Yes.
How are you?
Good. Eat the drug. Good.
Not only did it not make a ton of sense to me, but I openly chastised some of them for it. And then I went to college. And my first call home was to see if one of my boys would put me on with his plug. Oh, how to turn tables. My point being, you don't know what you don't know until you know that you don't know it. You know, my understanding of morality became much more nuanced and gradient the more exposed to my condition I became. And in the process, I learned to empathize with those with whom I shared a condition, even if not the same moral compass or code. Perhaps more importantly, however, I realized that what I saw my friends and family doing wasn't a result of they lacking moral fortitude or an inability on their part to see the quote unquote bigger picture. They were quite literally products of the environment in which they lived. Their condition is what influenced the choices that they made. And maybe if that condition wasn't so ganked to begin with, they would have chose differently and went down a different path. But that's just the thing. Who am I to chastise them for failing to consider how their actions were contributing to even perpetuating the state of things, when for most of them it was either this or working 2 separate retail jobs just to pass the poverty threshold? That's kind of the problem with one of my favorite movies, and really the problem with a lot of our understanding of what Black power actually is and who is worthy to participate. So yeah, this is going to be a rough one. Cut the black, Clarence.
This ain't no fucking community. This place a bunch of broke ass niggas with nowhere else to go.
But I'm here. Yup. Right up the street from the house I grew up in. Right up the street from all the same shit I have always wanted to get away from.
You need to leave this shit alone.
No, this shit is bigger than you. It's bigger than me. Maybe the next Fontaine won't be such a fucking pussy.
Let me preface by saying that They Clone Tyrone is by no means a bad movie. Matter of fact, it is, in my opinion, the best hood classic TM to drop this decade. It's just that the messaging is kind of clumsy, and I don't think enough people have called that out, and I think I know why. First of all, for y'all that don't know, for whatever reason, They Clone Tyrone is a 2023 film directed by Jewel Taylor, starring Steeman Willie Beeman, Tiana Parrish, and should have been the actual Jedi in the new Star Wars movies. Coincidentally enough, all 3 of those have starred in a Disney product at some point in the last decade and a half. I don't know if that says more about the death of marquee-worthy names in modern Hollywood or Disney's decline into what's essentially a private equity firm for IPs. Anyway, the central plot of this film revolves around a government conspiracy to conduct shadow experiments on impoverished Black people, supposedly for the betterment of society. So yeah, basically it's a medical documentary is what I'm saying. There is a long and documented history of private and public institutions conducting experiments on Black people for the benefit of white society. And for this reason, Black people have historically been distrustful of medicine and doctors. There's the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, in which 399 Black men were led to believe that they were receiving treatment for that disease, when in reality, they were just being injected with a placebo, with the intent of they being observed while the disease just ravaged their bodies untreated. Not only did this experiment last into the 1970s, but it was such common knowledge within American medicine that the findings were regularly published in well-known medical journals of the time, until a whistleblower spilled the beans to the press and thereby the public. There's J. Marion Sims, the father of gynecology, who developed that reputation by experimenting on enslaved Black women to find a cure for vaginal fistulas that he could wind up selling for profit. As a result, a number of conspiracy theories still surround the government's role in Black health. There's the theory that AIDS and crack were both created in a government lab to destroy the black community. There's the theory that neurodivergence doesn't exist in black people and it's just an excuse that school administrators use to excuse their own incompetence, implicit bias, or some combination of the two against black children. And while these theories aren't accurate, they're not complete dog defecate either. Like, there's enough circumstantial and even physical evidence out there to conclude that the US government did at the very least facilitate the trafficking and sale of drugs across and within its own borders as a backdoor method to support the Contras against the Sandinista government of 1980s Nicaragua. We also know for a fact that Reagan intentionally ignored the AIDS epidemic until it became too big to just blame on the gays, and also his own homeboy wound up catching the cootie bug. So yeah, of course it mattered then. We also know that black boys are disproportionately diagnosed with ASD disorders due to a combination of incompetence, implicit bias, and indifference toward them. And then there's FN all done to support most of the boys who do legit fall on that spectrum, and many wind up wasting away in special ed classes, causing unnecessary stress on both they and their parents. I don't know how it was where y'all are, but around these parts, the COVID vaccine came to the hood first. So yeah, my Hotep antenna went up like a nipple in near freezing weather. But then I saw all the rich white people standing outside the downtown clinic, and I said either the plugs are accepting referrals now, or they must have got a new abortion room for the white folks, until I saw the news and realized that, yeah, okay, well, maybe the jab is safe after all. Speaking of abortion, by the way, this is part of the reason why so many otherwise, if not left-leaning, then at least liberal black Americans are so adamantly against they or people they know having one, even if they support the practice in a general sense. The belief is that the government influences clinics and private practitioners to encourage black women to abort their babies so that there'll be fewer project kids and welfare queens for the white folks to worry about, which is ironic considering that the whole pro-life movement is based in anti-blackness, but this ain't really that video. What I'm saying is that theory is not completely wrong. Like, there was a whole report written like 40 years ago that basically argues just that. It reads like a modest proposal as told by Drax or Knuckles. I forget the name of it. Maybe Clarence can find it. If not, yeah, just go Google it. I'm sure it's there somewhere. Speaking of Drax and Knuckles, did anybody else notice that these two are basically the same character? My point is, black people have any number of good to great reasons for being suspicious of both government and medical practitioners. I won't bore y'all with the numbers again, but black women are at a substantially higher risk for death during childbirth, as well as their children dying themselves because of indifference based on implicit bias against blackness. Black men are disproportionately misdiagnosed with disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar due to a lack of cultural sensitivity prevalent in the mental health field. My wife and I have been in the process of searching for a home for I don't know, the past several months or so, and despite living in a state with the fourth best education system in the country, our challenge is finding a district that is equally as diverse as it is decorated. Because what's the point of sending our kids to Wonder Bread High School where they have a Subway and a Supercuts on campus when the black kids are getting sent to the counselor every other period for dropping their E's and R's at the end of their words? But the point I'm getting at is, this movie has more going on than meets the eye. That's what I'm trying to say. It's really an exploration into what I've called in the past and what academics refer to as Afro-Pessimism, and also what I'll call Afro-Nihilism. So before we get into all of that, we have to talk about what these two terms actually mean before y'all do what y'all did with Hotep and with woke and just turn it into a pejorative for things and people that make you cross the other side of the street, you little punk ass. In a nutshell, Afro-Pessimism is a worldview which holds that Western society is inherently anti-black and relies on said anti-blackness to sustain itself, particularly anti-black violence. An Afro-pessimist will argue that any framework that does not account for anti-blackness as a form of oppression unique from classism, patriarchy, etc., is inadequate to addressing the plight of black people. Like, I've literally spent almost every video on this channel arguing just that. Basically, society does not function without black people footing the bill for it in one way or another. We're at one time the workforce upon which this society is built, and also the scapegoats to whom you point when things go sideways. Think about how every election cycle we have to do the whole "why are black men voting Republican" thing, despite the numbers saying that black men at worst vote 8-2 Democrat to Republican, while the majority of white women in the country insist upon voting for adjudicated sex predators and against their own reproductive rights and professional interests at that. It's almost like anti-blackness is Western society's initiation ritual or something. You can't be fully assimilated until your first 4chan post, apparently. And with the knowledge of this in mind, many black people choose to remove themselves from mainstream society, its morals, and its ethics altogether, and just form their own. Which leads me to Afro-Nihilism. Now, granted, the way that a lot of y'all use the term nihilism makes my eyes roll so far back that I look like the Undertaker and I wind up giving my daughter nightmares. So let me explain what I mean when I say something is nihilist or nihilistic, because when researching black nihilism, it dawned on me that most academics don't actually know what nihilism is themselves. I'm not by any stretch an expert on Nietzsche or his philosophy by any means, partly because when you really start to dig into it, it's like the widest way of seeing the world you could think of, and it makes me throw up in my mouth a little bit. But what a lot of people have done is change nihilism into just shorthand for nothing matters, including how much of a heathen and or dickhole I am, when really it means there are no fundamental truths about human existence beyond what truths you give it. There are no universal codes of ethics, morality, etc. These are all merely constructs, according to Nietzsche, constructs that restrict the strong for the sake of the weak. But again, we're not getting too deep into any of that. I'm sure y'all are well actuallying away in the comments right now. Nobody cares about your philosophy major, which is exactly why you topped out at managing a target during day shift, bucko. So yeah, again, have fun barking in the mirror. My point is, nihilism basically says it's up to you to determine what does and does not have value and how much value those things have, including your own self. Basically, it's your job to find meaning for your own existence beyond what society says it is, and thereby form your own value system and act upon that. And if you can't find any meaning, then I mean, that's fine too, I guess. Survival of the fittest and all of that. This is why some people have interpreted Batman as a form of positive nihilist, due to he rejecting society's methods or even meaning of justice and executing his own. Personally, I think Batman is more Immanuel Kant than he is Nietzsche, but that's a whole other script that I wound up tossing because whatever. But I can definitely tell you that nihilism isn't just we live in a society, why so serious? No, that's called being a loser and using society as an excuse for why you won't do better than just bumming on your baby mama's couch. Assuming you have a baby mama, which honestly is given more credit than a lot of y'all deserve. So what does any of this have to do with the movie? Well, it comes back to the main issue I have with the movie. If you haven't seen it, or if you didn't read the title, it's revealed pretty early on that Tyrone, or Fontaine actually, is a clone. That's basically the primary motivator for the central characters, to find out why this small-time dope dealer keeps coming back from the dead like some sort of meth-dealing messiah. Well, it's to keep the black man down, obviously. That's basically that's basically the explanation that the movie gives. Or at least that's how the movie was interpreted by a lot of folk, including myself during first watch, which is pretty problematic if we're going to keep it a buck.
For me with that movie, I like it as a movie, but its political message is kind of trash, honestly, in my opinion. It's like not a very good analysis at all. And one thing I really felt about it was they just inversed the reality, right? They made that the hood, the streets, all that stuff is a bunch of clones doing what the white man want them to do.
Right.
Which is cap. It's all
Right.
cap. And it's inverse. It's the only person I felt like they got right was the preacher. Preacher was the only one that actually belonged in that group, you know what I mean, of clones of what the system wants to replicate. The system does not want to replicate a bunch of drug dealers and street niggas. The idea that that's what it wants to replicate is bogus, right? And yes, it will profit off the fact that there are street niggas. Don't get that twisted. But it's not something they want to replicate because we don't follow orders very much. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're not good at doing what they want us to do, even if we have bad politics, right? Even if our politics ain't resistant, right? In action, we tend to be resistant because we're like, fuck the state. Like, and we might, even if people are like not police or prison abolitionists, they still in action are like, fuck the state. I'm not paying taxes. I'm gonna get out here and hustle and make my money, pay my bills because I have to, because not only is the tax man asking him, but the rent man, that is the man. He's taking our shit, right? But when we see about who really is, it's the people who it really is talking about are the people who made the movie, right? Like, are the people who are the elite, right? Because the elite are the ones who really get molded in the way that the system wants to be molded in. And I think that's why my biggest problem with that analysis is inverted. Now, we can talk about the damage and harm that happens within the hood and the streets, because that's also real, but it isn't. It is definitely, and it also is a result of white supremacy, but it isn't in the way it wants to be depicted. Yeah, it's people trying to survive under white supremacy, trying to fight for scraps, and that's what's causing the fucking problem. And then people being emotionally irregulated because of the amount of trauma they go through on top of that, while trying to fight for survival, and then boom, it's the powder keg. Of course it is. What do you expect? Like, it would be for anybody to put in that situation.
The New York Times had an article a couple years back that celebrated the rise of black surrealism in film, but also criticized films like American Fiction and Get Out for being so concerned with letting white folks in on the joke at the cost of reducing their message to the culture, which I don't disagree with. But the irony is that that same article contrasted and praised they clone Tyrone for not doing that, when I'd argue that they clone Tyrone is probably the worst offender of those three. The Times article praises the movie because it challenges its characters and thereby its audience not to submit themselves to racist narratives concerning black identity. But the problem is in the way both the movie and the article frames Fontaine, and for that matter, Slick Charles. It's basically arguing that it's your choice, nay, your duty to just rise up and overcome your condition no matter your origin. It also argues that by not doing so, you're just as complicit as the state who created you in perpetuating your own condition, which again is not completely wrong, but it's nowhere near the full story. This is where the nihilism part comes in. Like I've said in past videos, the hood, and most definitely the streets, has its own code of ethics, one that isn't all that concerned with what mainstream society thinks, because mainstream society doesn't think about the hood until election season or when y'all run out of weed. I talked in the past about how growing up, we had our own form of what a lot of academics now would call communal policing, restorative justice, and even mutual aid. These things came about as a result of neglect by mainstream society, not because that society taught us how to do them. In the same way, the Tyrones of the world come about, many if not most due to those same factors, necessity. the implication of Tyrone being little more than an unwitting pawn of the state, even if unintentionally, reduces him, and at worst, it dehumanizes him. It reduces his role to the very trope that the movie is trying to tell its audience not to succumb to. But it never really bothers to ask why we would succumb to that trope. I mean, it kind of comes close in doing so with Yo-Yo's arc, who says at one point that she never intended to be a sex worker. I mean, who does? She had hopes and dreams beyond the Glen, and the accolades in her room say as much, but it just never happened for her. And that's the frustrating part for me. We never dig into why it didn't happen for her. And part of me feels like we didn't do that on purpose, because doing so would kind of contradict that whole first message of the movie, right?
A thing done with specifically street niggas and usually sex workers. So that was the one jump that was cool. Is they actually like get you humanize the sex worker, which is dope. But it's still also really done with street niggas every fucking time. Like, you know what I mean? There's very few movies that show depth. And even they show depth, it's in depth, like, you know, as the fallen man type shit. Like they've fallen from grace during a bad situation. Like even one of my favorite movies, which was All Day and a Night. Right, All Day and a Night, and it's about a street nigga that like killed somebody and stuff, and it tells his story, but it was like, you know, still the fallen man thing. Like he's doing life in prison now, and it's going back and reflecting how he got there, which is only way we're shown death at all, and it's still very rare, and it still doesn't show like the actual thing that created the actual trauma that created the issue. Usually still just a 2D thing, and so it kind of went with that same direction when it had so much potential to do more, but chose not to, and I think it mainly comes from bad analysis. Like, you think street niggas are faking. I'm like, no, there's a lot of niggas faking to be street niggas, but street niggas aren't faking, bro. Like, their problems are their problems. Their trauma is their trauma. You know what I mean?
So I said in a community post a while back that I had a homegirl in high school. She was not only an honor roll student every marking period, but she was a National Honors Society student as well, and a peer leader. She was a varsity athlete. Matter of fact, she was in that high school on scholarship to begin with. My point being, if anybody was going to make it was going to be her, but she didn't, which is why she became a sex worker. And no, before y'all ask, she never came to regret it, because, I mean, what other options did she really have? I mean, you could argue she had plenty, like I did way back when, but then I found out how much she was getting paid just to climax on camera a few times, and that she was taking that money to pay for community college, while I wound up having to move back home after my first year and transfer to a state school and commuted for the next 3 while taking out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans every year. So again, who was the right one here? Her or me sitting here over 10 years later while still having tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt on my books? It's the catch-22 of the black excellence myth. Yes, go get the bag, sis. Make that bread, bro. Stack them dollars, not only for yourself, but do it for the culture, but only as a doctor, as a lawyer, as an entrepreneur, or if we're really being generous, as an athlete or a rapper, something more respectable than sex work, something more respectable than a trope. In other words, the terms that the culture dictates, terms that may or may not be attainable in your particular socioeconomic condition. So then who is black excellence for except those who already have access to it to begin with? And if that be the case, why should folk like me, from where I come from, care what y'all have to say about the way that we live? You see this sentiment all over black art, from Bobby Womack's Across 110th Street to Freeway's What We Do. Yes, we know that it's wrong. We know that we're perpetuating the cycle, but some of us don't have the resources to just buy black our way out of our condition, nor the time to accumulate those resources by working 2 and 3 different service or supply line jobs. And even then, just making it out that's not really the goal of Black excellence, is it? Right? Black excellence isn't about survival. It's about achievement. It's about achieving the American dream. It is the recognition that comes with the capacity for constant and consistent consumption, copious consumption even. The American dream isn't just a two-story colonial with a white picket fence. It's the power and status that comes with being able to attain that. The American dream basically is plutocracy by merit. We want the respect, the praise, and the admiration of our peers, and we earn it with wealth, or at least the markers of wealth. Depending on when this video drops, I either will have or will be doing a video on how and why early hip-hop culture is basically just street culture with a PG-13 rating, specifically when it comes to fashion. You want to know why the Rakims and the LL Cool J's, the Run DMCs of the world, etc., look like doubles in a Supreme Team biopic? Because that's who and what they saw with the money and thereby the power when and where they grew up. There's a saying that goes, dress for the job you want, not the job you have, which I'm gonna keep it a buck for. A lot of y'all says y'all want to be strippers. Not gonna lie, hey, didn't I just tell y'all that my homegirl made a bag off of sex work? What I'm saying is go ahead and start that only page, fan sis. If you're going to get naked online, you might as well go ahead and monetize. Ain't no judgment here. Well, it's not so much that rappers wanted to be drug dealers, unless their name is Aubrey Graham. Rather, they wanted the same kind of clout that the pimps and the dope boys got. That's why niggas who had never touched a Pyrex pot started wearing dookie chains and shell-toed Adidas. That's why Biggie Smalls insisted on wearing his black butters to the Source Awards before Puff threw a mini Diddy tantrum over it. It's why Air Force Ones became the standard sneaker for every high school high in Black America during my early teens, before it wound up becoming the Jordan 4s by the end of that decade. Just like Cadillacs and chinchilla coats, a decade earlier, Beamers and Butters became the markers of wealth in urban Black America in the 80s and 90s. And as a result, those of us who came from there recognized that as status symbols. My point is, there's a lot more nuance to the streets than what They Clone Tyrone is willing to give credit, in my opinion. It's not fair to tell people the answer to their condition is just to rise up and overcome it over and over and over again. There are reasons why a lot of people can't, and some people don't even try. And that's the part that I think a lot of Black excellence practitioners conveniently ignore. I keep talking about how in Black households, mediocrity just isn't accepted. The reason being, we have to be exceptional just to have half the opportunities that exceptionally average white people get for just breathing. And many times being exceptional still isn't enough. I know this from personal experience. And if you don't believe me, ask yourself why Black women have the most degrees per capita, but still make between 75 and 50% of what white women and men of comparable education make respectively. But that then begs the question, what about the unexceptional? As much as we talk about the tragically talented, what about the ones who aren't exceptionally intelligent? What about the ones who don't have superhuman athleticism, who don't have prodigious artistry or bottomless charisma? In other words, what I'm saying is, what about the MBAs of the world? Jokes aside, though, what about the, for lack of better phrasing, the average Joes of the hood? Shouldn't they get a piece of the pie too? Like, what about the ones who realize that their skill set doesn't match the life that they want? The life that society promised, so long as they were just willing to work hard enough for it. What about the ones who don't have enough capital to start a brick and mortar, but they do have just enough to buy a brick and split it into halves and quarters? What about the ones who beat the system by breaking the system's rules? I used to not understand why many of my favorite rappers admired drug dealers to the point of naming themselves after them. And again, this is because relative to them, I was pretty well off. But even if I still won't justify it, I can say that in my older age that I do understand why. Those dope boys regardless of what you want to say about them, they did beat the system, even if at the expense of the community. They beat a path out of poverty, and they took a buttload of people with them. And even then, when I was growing up, it was the dope dealers who made sure that kids around my way were right during Christmas and back to school season. Again, I was good, so I never needed a dope boy bike or a book bag. But I know kids for whom that made an impression, and for whom that became the most tangible ticket out of their condition. Because again, that's who they interacted with, not, you know, the black excellence, petite bourgeois folk. Again, it's not so much that hustlers don't know or don't care about the so-called bigger picture. Like, actually talk to one for once, and you'll find out that most of them are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. I mean, like, you gotta be in order to keep track of that much money coming in at one time. Like, I say this all the time, the best accountants that I ever knew were all drug dealers. Is that they care more about the immediacy of their condition than what's happening behind the scenes to create that condition. And again, can you blame them? I don't think you can. Because otherwise, the rest of us, we would have all walked out of work the day that Donald Dickhead was inaugurated for the second time. But instead, we spent the next 2 weeks in shock and awe that he did all of the dumb ish that he said he would. And we're still going back and forth in the tweets and skeets about how pussy the Democratic Party is, while most of us are just as pussy as they, because we're basically doing the same thing. Jack and all. And it's not the streets exclusively that get shaded in this movie either. I'm not gonna lie, even if it's not intentional, the fact that fried chicken, grape juice, and box perms are the primary vehicles through which these experiments are being conducted, it kind of stinks of that whole brother can I speak to you for a minute type of anti-blackness that hoteps are often associated with. But yeah, that a lot of times that's black excellence doing that. John Lewis did a whole video about how a lot of us, including myself, missed that about the Boondocks. And while I did and still do give the show a bit more grace for at least pointing the finger back at the system as the primary culprit of our condition, it's kind of hard in retrospect not to see the whole just rise up and overcome type of respectability in that show, especially in the latter seasons. Even the neighborhood preacher in They Clone Tyrone, who's the third clone of the trio, is presented as anti-revolutionary of a force. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I don't understand why, or that I don't halfway agree.
It don't matter. Your grandson Jamal was gunned down in a drive-by shooting right next to the Dairy Queen.
But like I've argued several times now, religion historically among black folks, and not just black Christians, has been a countercultural force. Again, if y'all don't want to give the church its flowers, there's hoodoo, there's Santeria, there's even the Nation of Islam. At least they have the aesthetic and the rhetoric of resistance, even if not necessarily the practice. For some people, their faith is all they have to hold on to in a world that's designed to kick them in the nads anytime they roll out of bed. And I think that framing the pastor's message as a sedative and nothing more is a bit disingenuous, again, to the historical role that religion has played in black society. I think this gets lost on most people, though, because as pro-black as our rhetoric may be, many of us, our lens is still stuck in white supremacy's frames. So yeah, of course you do see religion as nothing more than the opiate of the masses and a tool of domination. Of course, rap music is little more than mindless turn-up joints designed to turn off the cognitive abilities of your brain. Of course, the hustlers of America are all basically the same person, because that's what white supremacy says those things are. That's what happens when Afro-Pessimism doesn't take the next step into black power and rejects the mainstream's frameworks of viewing the world. It's despair that becomes distaste, which itself becomes its own kind of anti-blackness, colored as much by racism as it is by classism. So again, I can see any number of Garveyites and FBAs watching this movie bricked or slicked up throughout, and that's the issue, isn't it? Like, if you told me Aaron Magruder wrote this script, I would not blink or wink, a nudge. And that's not a knock. It's just acknowledging that Magruder and, in this case, Taylor, do have a very, let's just call it an uncompromising view of the culture to the point of being inflexible. And perhaps more importantly, a more uncompromising view of the culture's internal issues. Like I said in the past, dogma is a privilege only afforded to those most detached from the struggle. And I'm not going to lie, I get some of that from this movie, but I did and still want to give it grace, the same way that I do with the Boondocks, and for the same reasons. Because the bottom line is too relevant for me, at least, to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's 3 core messages to They Clone Tyrone, if you ask me. And while the first may be a miss, like a big swing and a miss, like 3 strikes on 1 string miss, the other 2 are the reason why I say this movie is probably my favorite of this decade so far, and a must watch for all delegates of the Black delegation. Like that Times article I mentioned earlier says, the thing that always irked me with movies like this is I feel like they spend way too much time and effort trying to change individual white people's minds about their relationships with Black people. Or if we really feeling extra spicy, change their internalized anti-Blackness. These same white people who likely don't even have Black friends outside of work, but again, that's not this video. And I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing inherently. Matter of fact, it's a good thing, to keep it a buck. If for no other reason than it's just good business sense to cater to whiteness in whatever you're doing. Why do you think that this channel still isn't big enough for me to quit my day job? But that also means the culture suffers as a result of catering to white audiences. Like, as much as I enjoyed Get Out and really all of Jordan Peele's films, that movie specifically boils down to microaggressions, the movie. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't address, let alone tries to solve the root problem with the Black condition in America. Most white people that I have talked to over the course of my life understand anti-Black racism as primarily, if not exclusively, interpersonal. That is, if they acknowledge it at all. And that's kind of the problem. In the climax of They Clone Tyrone, Fontaine confronts his literal maker, the OG Fontaine, who I'll just call the maker for the sake of not confusing folk, who gives him both his personal ethos and, in the process, Fontaine's whole reason for being. The murder of the maker's baby brother by the police and the ensuing non-action made him conclude that this wasn't just a matter of one bad apple, but an entirely rotten system. That America, her laws, her institutions, her society were literally built on a foundation of white supremacy at the expense, or rather, as a result of anti-Blackness, or whatever. Y'all know what I'm trying to get at. My phrasing was kind of off there.
I mean, I think that that scene was dope, but I don't think the scene necessarily mutes out the bad analysis.
And I agree with that.
And like, I want to emphasize, I like the movie. Like, I want to emphasize, I like the movie. So it's not like going those movie shit. It's just saying I don't think his analysis was very good around it, and it also left me thinking, like, were you and I don't mean like a house nigga or a field nigga, but were you an inside nigga or outside nigga? Because people know what I'm talking about if you from the hood, right? Were you at home and in school and in the little after school programs keeping you out the streets, or were you actually out there? And it makes me feel like he was inside a nigga. You know what I mean? He was like staying out of trouble. He might have known some homies, got some shit, and would have been like, it was always outside of perspective.
Look,
based off of his
I'll put my hand up and say I was inside. I'm gonna just keep it 100. I was inside. I was at the after school program.
See, that's what people are surprised by, because I was like, I wasn't. Like, I was out there. You know what I mean? I was in the shit. Now, I wasn't the hardest nigga. I was not like, oh, the person you look to would be the pinnacle of street nigga. Like, you know what I mean? I wasn't that person. But, like, you know what I mean? I was out there. You know what I mean? Because I didn't have nobody give a fuck about me for the most part. And, you know, but I was stealing, like, my first hustle was stealing cigarettes from Safeway and selling to niggas on like the underage niggas. You know what I mean? Like, I was like 12 stealing cigarettes and selling to 14-year-olds. You know what I mean? I don't feel like you've been in it, because I feel like some of the perspective of like people get their oppression. People get that thing, and like the idea of also the rising up component is like, yeah, people think that, but like how is what it comes down to, and can we win? And I think a big part, honestly, the petty bourgeoisie and bourgeoisie play into, as well as the mainstream and liberal media, is right, like we can't win type energy, and so people started buying into that shit because that's what everybody's telling you.
Right.
Which, like, I remember one thing as an organizer I was really trying to focus on, and it was probably to my own detriment. It's like, nah, let me show how much these police and these pigs are fucking punks, bro. They ain't shit. They ain't shit. The system's weak as hell. And the only reason they got us still caught up in this and be able to do this is because they got us buying that are that strong. And they really ain't. They're fragile as hell. And like, you know, and one of the things that this is a little tangent, but I think it's still relevant. One of the things that's like really I learned, especially while going through the joint, is, man, niggas tough, bro, on a different level. You know what I mean? Like, people don't understand. Niggas are tough on a different level. Like, on a different level than even other street niggas, other street people. I'm like, when I say street niggas, in that sense, I'm using very broadly. You know what I mean? Like essays and shit like that too. And I'm like I think about all the time. I think about like what I found out about Terminal Island. Right? There's a riot in Terminal Island, for example. I'm not gonna like glorify any of this shit, but there was like 80 niggas versus like 300 paisas and all the white folks. Niggas mopped them, being outnumbered as hell. You know what I mean? And the thing is, that's like a trend, right? And it's because I think that's really because like years and years of like ancestors of oppression, and like people just built differently, and we don't see that in ourselves. And that's one of the things I try to put is like, and then you see the system, like white folks, for real, they ain't built like that. Even the ones that go to the war, they ain't built like that. They just aren't. That's why they got that mob mentality of like trying to like the lynch mob shit. Anyways, I'm going on super tangent, but I feel like that's the thing that I think people don't see that perspective. And are we perfect by any means? No. We have hella trauma. There's hella baggage in our communities that need healing. There's a lot of stuff we need to focus on, be able to protect each other and our sisters and all that. You know what I mean? That's real. But I mean, it's not the way it's depicted by media, even in this movie. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's also the way, like, even the way like the Pimp Brother was portrayed of like, bro, that's just a trope. That's like, you know, motherfuckers be flamboyant and shit, but it's some, not even all, but some be flamboyant and shit. But it's still, if you ever knew a real pimp, it's like way more depth than that. Like the way that people don't want to look at these things because one, they're divorced from, and two, they've been taught through white supremacy the whole time that this is the people that are not only dangerous but not valuable. You know what I mean? And yeah, and then I'll be real, man. There's a point of like seeing how like there's this tokenization, and when there's tokenization that happens, then it's like, oh, this person's the exception versus like, no, bro. Some of the people that never get a chance in the first place are some of the deepest, most intelligent people and strong and compassionate people I've ever met in my life. But they never given the opportunity to, you know, end up in a situation that can put them in a way to be elevated in that way. And also, the last component I want to say about it with Jules and about his perception, and a lot of petite bourgeoisie folks, is it's all seen through a European lens. It's all seen through an American European lens, not from our lens, and they don't even realize it. You know what I mean?
It's not enough to wear kente cloth scarves during February or for your white friends to just not say nigga around you. It's not enough to make Juneteenth a federal holiday or crown Jesse Jackson the emperor of black people. White supremacy will not be satisfied until every non-white person within its sphere is either exterminated or subjugated. Not only is that not facts, but I feel like the academics have a word for that. It kind of escapes me. I think I kind of said it up top. It's Afro-Pessimism, nigga. The maker then presents Fontaine, and thereby the audience, his solution to anti-blackness, which is assimilation, which I at least interpret it as a interpretation of respectability. And it's so ironic to me watching it back because Fontaine ultimately rejects respectability as a solution. But wasn't that kind of the whole point of him being a clone to begin with? Or at least you could argue that point, right? You could kind of argue that was the first point that the movie was trying to make. if you don't get what I mean, like I said earlier, the implication of Fontaine, the drug dealer, and Slick Charles, the pimp, being clones is that they're essentially living tropes. They're sentient stereotypes, which makes them just as big a problem to the culture as the system that created them, which again is a pretty problematic way of viewing the world. Like don't get me wrong, I am a baby of the crack era. All right, I made a whole video about seeing the fallout of Reagan's side hustle in real time and how we still haven't and won't recover from it by just buying black. I'm also not caping for sex trafficking or traffickers, but my point is the movie reduces its main characters to their chosen occupation without ever really bothering to ask why they went into that occupation to begin with.
You even see the lack of depth that's portrayed upon them. You know what I mean? And but you get homegirl, you get Yo-Yo, and Yo-Yo has a degree of depth to her, and I think it's because it's portraying specifically the idea of like the lost potential and the depth of this character. And that's why she's not the clone. But then all these hood niggas and all these people besides the one that kind of fell off the path type energy, the rest of them are clones, right? Or whatever. So they have no depth, which is kind of like mad cap, because if you know anything, you know, and like I said, if you know any street niggas, there's mad depth there. Like, you know what I mean? As much as there might be mad trauma there, there's also mad depth there. You know what I mean? And the idea that, like, and honestly, in real life,
the trauma.
Yeah, and in real life, in my experience, the more privilege you have, the less depth you have, generally. And I think there are exceptions, because people can go through a shit ton of hard shit even within privilege because of having effed up families and shit that might give them depth that people would normally have. But in general, when I meet people, the people who have more privilege tend to be more shallow, have less depth to them, and they also don't have a good grasp around reality. Which it kind of felt like the movie They Clone Tyrone put in the trope that it's the people at the bottom that have a lack of depth of reality, which is ridiculous, right? How are you going to face all the wrath of the system and all the discardment, and then not have depth and understanding of how this actually works? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know too many dope that don't understand how this shit actually works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the idea that we're ignorant, like, nah, bro. I know dope leaders that can't read, that have better political understanding of how the system works than most of these college educated theorists.
Like, at the very least, if you're not going to give Tyrone or Charles that grace, because I mean they are clones after all, then give it to Yo-Yo, or give it to Isaac, or give it to any one of the other non-clone characters in the movie, instead of they suddenly having an epiphany of respectability once they realize that the feds were behind it all along, like some kind of Scooby-Doo monster. Again, the underclass isn't dumb, and many times are even more aware of their condition than those of us higher up the social hierarchy. Matter of fact, they're so aware that they don't care many times. Not because it doesn't matter, but because there are more pressing matters at hand for most of those folk than starting the revolution. Like eating. And listen, I'm not trying to bash the movie, because it's still a good one and still has messages that I think are worth taking away. I'm just saying there is a pronounced lack of empathy for the streets in this movie, and I honestly would expect better from someone who grew up, I'm assuming, at least adjacent to that environment, or maybe growing up in that adjacency is why Taylor is so harsh on the streets, because he sees the potential for more. Because where the average HOA member just sees pimps and hoes with hearts of gold, he sees a revolutionary force if only they saw it in themselves. And that's why, again, I can't throw the baby out with the bath. Like I said, Taylor isn't concerned with interpersonal racism. He's concerned with systemic racism. I think this is part of the reason the film didn't click with a lot of mainstream viewers the way that it did for the culture, which is why we don't talk about it as much as we do Get Out or Do the Right Thing, even though I personally feel like They Clone Tyrone belongs in a tier with Do the Right Thing. Matter of fact, I think it belongs in the tier above Get Out, to be honest, because the primary antagonist in this film isn't any individually racist white person or even a group of racist white people. It's the man, just like the blaxploitation films that inspired it. which is why, like those films, it became an instant cult classic within community, but again, isn't talked about nearly as frequently as Get Out or as heralded the way that American fiction was in mainstream discourse, at least, which itself is basically just a better version of Bamboozle, if we're going to keep it a buck. And it's funny because Bamboozle itself was received. It was ahead of its time, and it's not dissimilar from the way that They Clone Tyrone is now. The messages of both Bamboozle and They Clone Tyrone, I believe, I think were just too much for whiteness to handle at the times that they came out. But at least Bamboozle, in the year since it's been released, has, in retrospect, it's gotten a few more flowers, if for no other reason than because of white liberal guilt, I guess. I don't know if They Clone Tyrone will ever get that kind of treatment, because the message of that movie is actually dismantling the very whiteness, or at least dismantling the society upon which whiteness, or white privilege at least, is built. The final act of the film is the hood rallying together to fight back against the oppressors, laying aside any petty squabbles they might have had for the sake of the culture again. And I'm gonna keep it a buck, that's real. Even in the ghettos of current day America, loyalties are determined by block, then by neighborhood, then by city, and so on. Y'all see how every like half decade or so, those street groups from coast to coast come together, even if momentarily, when called upon to do so? What if that could be sustained, though? What if we could come together for something other than the death of a rapper or the victory lap of another? I think that's the question Taylor is asking in this film. And as much as I've criticized it, that's the thing that keeps me coming back to it. Because for all the flaws in the messaging that I pointed out, the message is not completely wrong. We do have the might to resist, but the question that the movie and many of us, I don't think, bother to ask enough is, how much is it going to cost? And are we willing to pay that? I said this a while ago. My main issue with a lot of these online calls to action, specifically these mass boycotts that we love so much, is that they're expecting a lot for sacrificing very little, you know? And listen, I get that folks that can't do much want to at least be able to do something, but I'm gonna tell y'all the truth. In my history of working on campaigns, political, labor, nonprofit, etc., any organizer worth their salt is going to ask you to sacrifice something more than just the cost of a Happy Meal every now and again. For one of these things to work, it needs to be sustained for months at the least, and more than likely a year, if not multiple ones. It takes infrastructure that such capricious calls to action just don't have many times. Like, take for example the Montgo bus boycott. What people forget about that is that, one, Rosa Parks was a plant. Matter of fact, she wasn't even the first choice as a test study. It was Claudette Colvin who wound up getting the Apollo Amateur Night treatment once the organizers found out that she had a bun in the oven. Two, it came in the context of the wider civil rights movement that had built an infrastructure for at least like a decade earlier. And it was actually inspired by the Baton Rouge bus boycott a few years before it, and the protests that were kickstarted by the gang rape of Reese Taylor in 1945. That's what really got the civil rights movement going in earnest. Three, not only did Montgo last for over a year, but black taxi drivers offered rides at a severely discounted rate. People who owned cars drove their neighbors to work or offered their vehicles in the name of the movement. Black churches across the country raised money for shoes and taxi fare. And when the city pressed local insurance companies not to insure black drivers, the organizers of the boycott reached out across the pond to Lloyd's of London. Like, even the Caucasoids got involved, believe it or not. Yeah, I know. Oh, look, Bill is giving the white folks their flowers. Hell must have frozen over. Housing prices prices have become affordable or something. White housewives got involved picking up and dropping off their black housekeepers before and after shifts. And the UAW donated $5,000 to war organizing efforts. And all of this while litigation was taking place, including the landmark case of Browder versus Gale, which outlawed segregation on public buses. And even then, the part that absolutely nobody talks about is how the white folks reacted after that ruling. King's home got shot up. A black girl was beat nearly to death like a drum by some inbred cousin humpers. A man was lynched, and the city just wound up strengthening segregation in every other public institution besides the bus. Are y'all really built for that kind of fight? And even if the answer is yes, again, you ain't doing all of that with a Canva flyer by itself. You can only do that with a community of like-minded people, all committed to doing their role and doing it for as long as necessary. Fontaine and crew rejected the idea of assimilation for the sake of survival and instead chose to blow the lid off the whole operation. In the process, the collective hoods of America now have their own ultimatum in that film: stay woke or go back to sleep. And the thing I love the most about it is that it is the hood that's presented as the vanguards of this revolt, because let's be real, that's what it's going to be if there ever is one. I talked about this in the video that I did with Reverend Retwist, but Frantz Fanon argued that the underclass is the most intellectually independent from the dominant ideology of every colonized society. Therefore, it is the underclass that is the most revolution ready. And it's our job as the petite bourgeois blacks not to necessarily lead them, but to support them with our resources, namely our money, and by educating them on the parts that they might not have altogether, but not to beat them over the head with their lack of it. Like, seriously, so some of y'all really got to lead a $5 words and loan and learn how to speak in the plain kings. I don't remember from where I heard this quote, but it says, everybody wants to die for the revolution, but don't nobody want to wash the dishes. And I see a lot of that in the age of click-based activism. The truth is, though, most of us just aren't built for that kind of fight. That's just facts. But the hood is. And even if you are built for that, an army still marches on its stomach. Who's going to be the ones to raise the resources to support the freedom fighters? Who's to say that the fight is going to be an actual fight to begin with? That's kind of where y'all lose me with the whole big R revolution thing, man. I talked about this with Black Power in the past. Everyone hyper focuses on the guns part of Black Power. They focus way too much on it, to be honest. But the main takeaway from Black Power is the value they showed in communal-based politics. The free breakfast programs, the self-defense courses, the food co-ops, the free health clinics, the education. Say it with me, kids. Education. The thing that a lot of people miss about Black Power is that it was more than just quoting Mao to your neighbors. It was more than just walking into the Capitol building's rotunda with ARs and shotguns. It was building an alternative to a society that had abandoned its black population. The problem is, as the 60s became the 70s and the American dream became, even if marginally, more accessible to black people, community became less and less of a priority for those who could afford to have their own. And thus, those people assimilated into mainstream society and appropriated the culture of the colonizers. We talked about this again 2 months ago, I think, at this point, but this is how and why respectability became the preferred depiction of blackness from basically the end of the 70s until Trayvon Martin. But like I said last month, while some of us just started coming around to the whole black radicalism in the last decade or so, that politic never really left the hood. It just morphed into Hotep tree somehow and wound up making its way to the HBCUs and even some PWIs. Again, y'all gotta watch the joint that I did with Feek to find out more about that. The point I'm getting at is there is no fixing a system that isn't broken. There are two choices you have. You either get down or you get out of it. And I give They Clone Tyrone again the same grace that I gave to the Boondocks, because yes, while both do have a habit of devolving into a diatribe against baggy jeans and backwards baseball caps at times, they both do something that most mainstream media doesn't do, and that's tell the truth about racism. They tell you that it's quite literally the foundation of Western society, and it can't just be diversity trained away. That's the true enemy of black people, folks. They remind us that despite how frustratingly self-defeating and short-sighted they can be and are most times, the true enemy of black America is not white people. It's not white liberals. It's not even the Trump humpers, to keep it a buck. But our real enemy is the state. It reminds us that the only real route to black liberation is to either remake our current institutions in the image of equity or just build our own. And that's true for all POCs, to be honest, but most white folk want us to just be satisfied with a black box and a few days off of work because, again, short-sightedness, man. So what's the alternative then? Like I said, build your own. I'm a petite bourgeois nigga who grew up, that's all I knew. You feel me? Was gated cul-de-sacs and, all of that and whatnot, 2-car garages and what have you. But I'm trying to divorce myself from this white supremacist lens, because I understand that that's the reason why, I look at certain environments, I look at the hood, I look at the streets, and all I can see is, is black folks destroying their own community. But I understand that the reason why I think that way and the reason why I see it that way is because I've been conditioned to look at it that way. So how do I break out of that?
I mean, I think FD touched on it in the video I dropped recently, the Kendrick video. But it's like, honestly, bring your resources and immerse yourself in the community, like for real. Like, and I don't mean the community that seems nice to you, that seems like the easy, but the community, the side of the community just kind of scares you. How about that? Immerse yourself in that. Understand what's happening, build actual relationships, and then you'll have a better analysis, right? And I don't want to hear you can't do it, it's dangerous, because I'm sorry, but the motherfucking white dudes from The Wire did that shit. So what the fuck, you can't do it? You black, bro. They like, that's, come on, man. Get up in this shit. You know what I mean? Like it just, yeah, you know what I mean? So that's just how I feel. Like, you got to really understand and grasp like the complexity of not only like what people are going through, but of them themselves, right? Like I was talking, I think I talked to you last week when we talked before. There's cats like you don't realize that there's a million street niggas that be anime fans. Like one of the craziest cats I knew in juvie, who like was 14 and hit and was in there for hitting a drive-by with a Tech 9, bruh, was the biggest DBZ fan I ever met in my life. He was about it, and he was ready to fight if he wouldn't put it on DBZ when it's time. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's complexity. That's like, people aren't these two-dimensional images, and you have to really immerse yourself to see the complexity of people, especially, and be patient with it too, because you can't expect people to open up to you and trust you because, look, I'm here, so you should automatically trust me because I made the effort. Like, nah, man. And I think there's a lot of times where people do move that way, that are our own people, and it's like, bro, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but you move like white people. Like, it'll be like, I mean, you should be more humble and be like, look, I need to come see what we're really going through. And when people do that, you see it change them. You see it be like, damn, I really had the wrong perceptions about shit. And then you see like their priorities change. You know what I mean? But I can't explain to people how valuable that is because it can't be monetized. It's not something that's going to get you cash. You know what I mean?
Right. Again, the goal of Black Power was never to assimilate into mainstream society. It was the establishment of Black identity outside of the white man's framework. But again, enough people got enough crumbs off of the colonizer's table that they decided to abandon shit and just dress the white man's culture in the Black man's clothes. That's all Black excellence really is, in my opinion. And it's the reason why, despite our continued efforts to do so, it has not done what it is promised it would do in the 60, 70-ish years that we've been telling people to just buy, bank, and barter their way out of oppression. Probably further back than that. And we can go all the way back to Garvey to keep it a buck. What we need to do is to create our own framework, our own society, honestly, one that mirrors what we practiced before we claimed the consumer culture as our own. I don't know. Actually, I do know exactly who was watching this video. Jeffrey. So let me make it clear that I am by no means advocating for a violent big R revolution. Matter of fact, I've said several times now that some of y'all treat the word revolution the way that many Christians treat the rapture. In other words, as an excuse to stand around with your thumbs up your back end while the world just burns around you. But what I am advocating for is for Black people to stop tying themselves in a knot, begging white supremacy to humanize us and build a better framework already with blackjack and hookers, obviously. Yeah, I know that joke is old and dated, but store the future ones. Y'all still keep asking me to make those. That's the end of the video. I ain't got no more for y'all.
With no union and no benefits, no dental plans, I can't eat off no $100,000. I got cavities that need filling. You can't feed a nigga peanut juice. I put your feet up in the nigga's shoes. I like the green and give a nigga blue. I sip a purple, make a nigga rude. Nigga drunk versus you can solo too. Y'all with me? Tips off this gift that we curse with, then my mind drift. Am I defeating the purpose? Did you feel like shit when you wish yourself first? Shit, who will pay the bills? Supply the bill, no surplus.